First speaker of today is Amir Montazery. He will be talking about security in open source projects. Please welcome him and his talk.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Thank you so much, everyone. Good morning. Is the audio okay? Okay, great. Thank you. Yes, good morning. Excited to see you all here. A lot of firsts for me today. First FrOSCon. I'm very happy to be here. My first time giving a talk on a Sunday morning, which this will probably be a lot different than the typical talks given on Sunday mornings, as well as my first time giving a talk with a mustache. So very excited for you all to be here with me for that today, and excited to talk to you all about security in open source projects, in particular the work we've done at the Open Source Technology Improvement Fund, or OSTIF, or OSTIF.org. A lot of different names for the same thing, and I'm very happy to talk to you all about it today, this morning. So kind of the main scientific research and kind of what motivates this work is a research paper called 0 Days, Thousands of Nights, which did a lot of empirical research on vulnerabilities, in particular zero-day vulnerabilities in software. And one of the main conclusions of this research was that finding vulnerabilities often requires more in-depth auditing, logic review, and source code analysis in order to go several layers deep. And this applies especially to software projects that are long-standing, so they have been around for a long time, or have had a lot of scrutiny kind of at the surface level. So this research really inspired us to start the OSTIF, which I will talk about more right now. So the thesis of this talk is that security audits, when done to a high level of quality, are an incredibly valuable tool in the tool belt for improving the security posture of open source projects. Now, I use that wording very consciously, that it is a valuable tool in the tool belt, meaning that it's not the only tool, it's not an end-all silver bullet for all of the security woes in software and in open source, but it is a very valuable thing that projects can do. Our body of work from OSTIF spans coming up on 10 years now, and 100 engagements or security audits, close to 200 medium and high vulnerabilities found and fixed. Some of them very nasty. If you'd like to go to our previous reports and check out some of the work there, supports this thesis that security audits can be a really, really effective way to improve the security of open source projects, especially as security has really gone from a secondary thought to really the forefront of development and just all of the interest and resources going into security. So that is why these security audits are an excellent option or a tool, as I mentioned. All of our body of work is transparent, so all the work that we have done, all of our research and audit reports are available to the public for viewing and for scrutiny. So feel free to check those out. I'm going to talk about some of the common types of vulnerabilities found from these audits, some lessons learned, some common auditing mistakes that we'd like to share as this exercise becomes more commonplace between organizations and foundations. And lastly, we'll provide a little bit of statistics from our work. Oh, I'm flying through this. So these are some of the most common types of vulnerabilities that have been found in our security audits. A lot of these do map to the OWASP top 10. Probably not terribly surprising to anyone. A lot of this is just paying off the technical debt from years of development. We have a lot of denial of service, vulnerabilities found and fixed, cross-site scripting, command injection, and authorization. And the source of this information is from a blog post we put out last year of our 50th audit milestone, or was it last year or 2 years ago now? But all of this information can be found there. Some lessons learned from doing this for a long time and doing it many times now. Some lessons learned, the importance of clarity and communication. I think part of the reason security audits and security auditing as a practice is not more popular is that there have been instances of it not being as productive or as successful maybe as the organizations and foundations that have procured these audits have wanted. So it's really, really important to establish good lines of communication with the projects, in particular the maintainers or the community of that project, and having that communication between them and the audit team, which is typically a third-party expert in the field. Second one being that success correlates with scoping, kind of to my previous point of getting feedback that maybe some security audits were not what kind of was originally expected or hoped. We've seen that a lot of times that has come with incomplete scoping or maybe unclear scoping. So having a very specific scope of work of what a security engagement entails is extremely important. Otherwise, you can have security experts who are being unutilized and or just not looking at the most important parts of a project, or just doing very general kind of generic review, which typically is not as successful as really honing in on what the high-risk areas of a project are and what the needs of the projects are. Next is interest and collaboration. So everyone has to come to the table, the proverbial and sometimes literal table, for these engagements to work. There have been instances where maintainers or community members of a project are understandably so, just so incredibly busy and spread thin that they're not able to really commit time to participating in a security audit. And that participation and interest in doing this collaborative engagement is very important. Next, we have a balance of testing types. So instead of just focusing on, for example, static analysis, tooling, or code review, it's really important to kind of, along with the scoping point, to utilize different types of testing to augment the code review and the security work done by the auditors. And lastly, resolution is pivotal, meaning that there has to be some kind of a collaborative remediation period where, because open source development is very different than commercial development, there has to be that resolution period where auditors will stick around and help the communities and maintainers with fixes, with explaining their findings, helping with root cause analysis, and just working together on making the project stronger. Because kind of going back to some of the other points, we've heard of instances where, someone came in, they looked at some stuff and they were gone, and they were never to be heard from again. And those engagements don't tend to be as successful as ones where you're working with a team that really cares about the security of the project and is invested in improving its security. So that resolution period at the end, we found, is very important as well. Some, some common audit mistakes and how to avoid them. This is both from our personal experience doing this for a number of years, as well as feedback we've collected over the years from both foundations and organizations that at some point started working with us or worked with maybe another team and then started working with us, or just feedback we've collected from our network and trying to learn as much as we can and how we can help in a thought leadership kind of perspective where we can really share this information and help organizations do this self-sufficiently. So some of the ones we've heard are, and kind of how to avoid them. A big one is to focus on the bid, not the bidder. So lots of times, and understandably so, either with limited budgets or limited time constraints, not as much focus can be put on the actual bid itself. And sometimes and it's of course very important to focus on the skill set of the bidder as well. The teams that want to work on projects ideally will have significant amounts of experience in the thing that they are reviewing or auditing, and less so much of a generalist to just kind of review things kind of from a kind of 10,000-mile view. And then the second one being lack of communication. So going back to why it's so important, the lack of communication can be detrimental. So it's really important to, for example, set up secure communication lines between the community, the maintainers, and the audit teams and the experts that are working on improving the project, to have that good stream of communication. Next would be only using automated tooling. I think depending on who you ask, there's a lot of interest in security tooling, which is great, of course, but only using automated testing we found has not been nearly as effective as manual code review. Going back to the first slide with the different levels, so going deeper into the project, deeper into the code. And you don't typically get that with just automated tooling. That is more for scanning more surface level or less deep-seated issues. And then lastly, sorry, I guess this might be a little repetitive, but I'm just really focusing on scoping because that's one of kind of the key components in doing this successfully. Is it has to be very focused and very outcome driven. These are just a couple of statistics from our body of work, as I mentioned earlier. This first number is always changing, but it's probably a little closer to 130, 140, but a decent amount of projects completed and progress are in the pipeline. So thankfully, we now have a lot of experience, a lot of iterations of doing this. And because we focus so much on improvement, we've been able to improve internally over time in doing this effectively. Again, these numbers always are always changing, by project as we do more, but a decent number of high and medium severity findings fixed. We stopped using the term critical and just kind of bundled that with high just to keep it simple. A lot of different types of CWEs, so it's not just one specific aspect of security that's being fixed in projects with security audits, but we're typically finding a lot of different ways to help projects improve. And then going along with testing, as fuzzing has grown in popularity and accessibility, part of our audits include either augmenting or actually building fuzzers for projects. and helping that get set up in a way that can provide benefits over time and not just at the point in time of the audit. Now, cost is a little tricky because some projects are very small in terms of complexity, lines of code, and some are absolutely massive. So the approximate cost of an audit, with our experience, has been around 74,000 USD. And breaking that down, of an approximate average cost per bug fix or tool implementation being around 6,592 USD. And one thing that I would say makes our work more successful too is focusing on the holistic security of projects. So typically a lot of our security audits will include some kind of threat modeling, static and dynamic analysis, tool integration, fuzzing, and of course the vulnerabilities that are found and fixed as part of the exercise. So yes, going back to why this is important and why it's effective is this concept that if you really want to find the big fish, so to speak, you have to dig deeper or go deeper. So it's an excellent research paper. I highly recommend taking a look. This is just a very simple visual of kind of why what we do at Open Source Technology Improvement Fund is unique and very effective by bringing kind of these three main elements together. The base of it, number 3 here, a champion or an independent organization, basically an entity to really take on the responsibility of this project, of doing the audit from start to finish, which is what we do at OSTIF. We found that to be very important because, again, people are busy. Maintainers, community members tend to be very busy and understandably so. And so having what I call a champion, someone to really take the responsibility for it from start to finish, we found to be very, very helpful. Second, having strong audit experts. So we work almost exclusively with teams that have significant open source experience, not just kind of generalist or commercial experience. We typically only work with teams who are actively involved in the open source community themselves and understand kind of the core ethos of what it takes to develop an open source. And because of that, we found that the experts are able to really help projects in a much more deep and holistic way as opposed to maybe a commercial company. Again, nothing against those commercial companies. A lot of them do fantastic work as well, but we found that having the right people on the right project really makes a significant difference. And then going back to some of the points from earlier, project engagement and involvement. So everyone and the key players, one of those key players is the maintainers or project community responsible for the project. So having them involved, so bringing these three things together, we found has been extremely successful with the security work that we've done. So I kind of added this last minute, but just thinking about a call to action for everyone. Again, I really want to thank you all for being here. To be honest, was expecting this room to be completely empty, but I'm really, really grateful for everyone coming out. So, and everyone online as well. So, I would highly recommend checking out our body of work and how we've helped open source projects. I haven't mentioned it, I guess, as much in this talk, but kind of a core tenet of all of this is transparency. So being transparent about the process, about the results, about the work that was done, who did the work, is absolutely pivotal. So we have all of our work online on our website and on our GitHub repository. So please feel free to check those out. Part of the reason we put that out is for additional scrutiny and feedback, so we are certainly open to that. I'd recommend talking to your network about open source security audits and how they can help projects that you care about. And lastly, let us know if you have questions or if we can help. We don't feel like we have to be involved directly in every single security audit that happens in open source, but if we can even provide some feedback or insight, that's something we really strive to do as well, to be a thought leader and to help indirectly as well if needed. So for example, we had a foundation recently come to us because they received bids for security work that they were interested in doing, and it just seemed very high to them, so they just came to us for feedback and just like a second opinion, and we were able to help them negotiate down their bids just because we kind of let them know that they were kind of being overcharged. So if that can be helpful too, we'd love to be a help how we can. Yeah, so that's all I had for this talk. Thank you so much again. I have some links here, both our website, ostif.org, and I'm sure there's a way to make that URL prettier, but I don't know how to do that. But you can just go on GitHub, which is also directly accessible from the website too, to see all of the body of work that we've done. And with that, I believe you said until 10:50. So I would love to open it to questions.
There should be enough time for questions.
Yeah.
If you have a question, please raise your hand. Then I'll bring you a mic, and then we can continue.
Awesome. I love it. Thank you. Bring it on.
2 questions. The first one is, what's your funding model? And the second one is, how can I apply?
Sure. The question was, what is the funding model, and how can I apply? Just to clarify, do you mean apply? Oh, sorry. I was just asking a clarifying question.
So I work on Sequoia PGP, and that is broadly considered to be a piece of critical internet infrastructure. And I've looked at doing an audit, and the number that we found was similar to the number that you quoted, which we can't really afford. And it sounds like you're offering them to organizations that apply, and so I'm sort of interested in applying and working with you in the future.
Okay, thank you so much for clarifying. So yeah, the funding model, it's mainly our funding comes from organizations and foundations. So we have in the past worked with a number of large organizations like Microsoft, AWS, Google, and them, who typically like to fund audits for projects they are very invested in, and less so for, or I would say very directly invested in, and less so kind of those overarching projects that are super important, but because it's not directly related. We also have started working with a number of funding organizations that are actually trying to fund this kind of work, namely the Sovereign Tech Fund, who I would highly recommend, and I'd be happy to connect you to if... Oh, perfect, even better. But yeah, they've started funding through their bug resilience program a number of security initiatives, including security auditing for critical projects. As far as application, we're still very small, so let's just connect. Send me an email, and I'd love to talk more and see how we can help, because unfortunately we're not at the place yet. I would love to get to a point where we have the kind of budget to just support projects that we like and we know are critical, and but we're just not there quite yet. We're still very much at the mercy of the people who want to fund specific projects. So thank you for that question. Next question.
Hey, morning.
Morning.
Morning, Amir. Hello? Okay, cool. Great talk, great work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm interested in like your perspective or experience on the following thing. So an audit is kind of, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it's a kind of it's a single point in time assessment of the security posture of a project, and that's fine. And you said it's an audit is one tool in the tool belt. Do you have any experience on how, with regards to the lasting effect of an audit? Like, as part of your work, did you get back to a project after like 2 or 3 years to see, like, did the same things happen again? Because if I would touch code and you find a vulnerability and the next day I touch it again, I would probably break it again because, you know, I'm stupid and so are humans. So any experience on, let's say, the lasting benefits of an audit, or is that just something you would anyway, like, outsource to proper testing and fuzzing and so on and make that part of the CI/CD pipeline?
Excellent question. So just to repeat for the... because it's the mic. Okay, excellent. Yes, that is an excellent question, and that's actually something we are looking into kind of formally analyzing a little bit more to show, because we know just from feedback, direct and indirect feedback, and just circling back with projects over time, that while there is very much a immediate kind of point in time benefit, lots of times that comes in the form of, you know, a lot of the technical debt and a lot of the just never having been reviewed before by an independent third party. But we have found a couple of very interesting things. One being that we do think that these work. So because we have some evidence of projects that have undergone a couple security audits now, just because they've been around for so long, and as you said, the code is always changing. But we've typically found a pretty significant kind of diminishing, I don't know what the correct term for it is, so I'll just explain it. Basically, we found that lots of times a project on their first ever audit will typically, there will be some findings. We've noticed that depending on the state of the project, they could be some really nasty things that maybe just have been overlooked, or just a number of smaller things. But then we've seen that over time, when they get their second audit, that all of those kind of nasty bugs that were found from the first one are not found anymore. And that could be, you know, anecdotal or coincidental, but we've seen it pretty consistently now, where long-standing projects that have undergone audits a couple times now, there's always significantly less findings with each iteration. And that ties into a couple of things, which I'll do my best to explain, because I'm of the opinion that projects, especially extremely critical projects, not to use that term too much, but like many other things that are maintained, should undergo regular third-party audits, especially what we did in my previous life as an IT auditor was a risk-based audit program. So, you know, the software that we know is just absolutely critical should be continuously monitored in many ways, and then audited regularly. We did about every year. Less or more lower risk areas every 3 years, and very low risk areas every 5 years. So something like that could be applied, because especially as projects change, it is important to have that kind of that third party scrutiny. That being said, also we found that because we focus very much on kind of the holistic improvement, the audits do have very much a point-in-time boost, I guess you could say, but that tends to last for some time, because a lot of this involves updating documentation or processes, updating threat models, which can then help a project over time almost serve as a playbook to be to help with understanding issues and and remediating them. And then, of course, as I mentioned too, implementing tools as part of these audits, we've seen that has been very helpful. We've had projects come to us, a year or 2 years later saying, oh, those fuzzers that you implemented found, more bugs that were pretty nasty that we were able to fix because of that fuzzing infrastructure. So I think it's a little bit of both, but I'm of the opinion, that especially as software changes and matures a lot, it is a practice that should be done somewhat regularly. But of course, that kind of goes back to the question of kind of funding and who pays for that kind of thing. There's a lot of opinions on that and a lot of argument on it. So we can open that can of worms another time. But yeah, overall, I would say yes, the audits have a very pronounced immediate benefit, but they also have those lasting benefits too. And we are, through feedback collection and analysis, trying to kind of formally put that in a way that we can communicate a little better to convince or to show that because some people think, oh, this is just like a one-time thing or one time, so why even do it? But I think this type of research can show that while yes, it is a focused engagement over a period of time, it can very much have long-lasting effects. So thank you for the question. And if you have any thoughts on that too, or what you would like to see in kind of demonstrating kind of what that would look like, I would love to talk about that more. Excellent. We still have time for more questions.
I have a question, which were the common vulnerabilities you have found during the security audits, and what were the strategies you used to solve them?
Okay, yeah, excellent question. I kind of brush over that in this slide here. Some of the most common ones, and by common, I think these are the ones that happen the most often. Denial of service, cross-site scripting, and different types of authorization, namely privilege escalation. In terms of strategies for remediating them, I can't speak to the technical details personally, but I know one thing we really stress and we found to be very helpful is really thorough root cause analysis. So if an auditor is seeing a pretty consistent issue, let's say, then instead of kind of solving those individual symptoms or those individual things, to focus on the root cause causing all of those and address the root cause to prevent that whole class of bug from reoccurring. So I'd say that's been extremely effective, doing really deep root cause analysis. And as a result of that, looking for classes of bugs or ways to close classes of bugs so that you're not just treating a symptom, you're treating, the underlying cause. So thank you so much for your question. And if you'd like to talk more, I'll be around. So if you have more questions. I believe, Roman, you have a question? Yeah. Okay.
We are, as a PHP Foundation, we are very happy about the collaboration that we have. Our security audit is close to finish, and but our security audit is funded by STF, the Sovereign Tech Fund, and my concern at the very beginning was, okay, what if the audit is like blank, like no vulnerabilities found? Will it be approved by STF then? I'm like, oh my God, what will happen? So my question is, did you have maybe instances when those issues that you mentioned led to like not so good quality results, and how did you handle that? Yeah, that's my question.
Excellent, thank you, Roman. Great question. Should I repeat that question too? Okay. So that really is a great question and something we've thought about a lot. And there is some research on the topic because having a clean audit report or having an audit and not finding anything isn't inherently a bad thing. It could, in fact, be a very good thing. So I think that's why, for example, the transparency is very important, why we publish the entire audit report, for example, because that way we can demonstrate, okay, within the scope of what was looked at, this was the result. And so within that context, having that context, instead of just looking at, oh, there was one high, one medium, one low. Because I do think, and I think this actually turns a lot of people off, is when the focus becomes solely on finding bugs. Because that's why we've seen instances where, for example, bug bounties have not been as successful as initially hoped because it's a lot of noise, right? So but those companies that kind of sell those services, they're like, oh, we found 5,000 high, and it's like, well, they rate everything as high, So it's really important, I think, the context, I would say, to summarize it, and also just that extra context that just because you don't find anything doesn't mean that good work wasn't done. In fact, it could very much mean the opposite and be almost like a case study or evidence that, we're actually doing okay as a project, and some experts came in and didn't find anything. So it could very much be a very positive thing. And so I think a lot of it is perspective, and what you would consider kind of a successful result, which is why while we mention those statistics and those vulnerabilities, that's not the core objective, right? The core objective is the improvement of the security of the project and finding and fixing vulnerabilities, especially when you find and fix classes of bugs, is a very effective way of doing that, but it's not, I would say, the only measure. So yeah, that is an excellent question too, and something we've thought a lot about too. So I'd be happy to talk about it more, and thank you very much. We're ecstatic to be working with PHP Foundation, so. Thank you. All right, I think we have time for one more. Yeah, let's do one more, or two more. Okay, two more questions.
What is the typical duration of an audit you do? How many weeks or days? Or?
That's a great question. I'd say the median, because of course projects can vary. Some are very large, some are very small. The core audit work, the median is around 5-person weeks, 4 to 5-person weeks. Larger projects can be closer to 8 to 10. But there is, I would say, a minimum bar where, because of things like kind of onboarding and getting to know the project, and that going back to the digging deep part, you need time to get there. So there's at least a minimum. We've done some in as little as 2-person weeks. But yes, the average has been about 4 to 5. And then there's usually a onboarding period, going back to why scoping is extremely important. I don't know where it is, but why scoping is super important. There can be an onboarding period that can take up to 1 to 2 months. And then going back to remediation and fixes, that can take anywhere from 1 to 3 months also. So there is some variance to it, but overall we typically have a churn of about 3 months, give or take. I believe there was. Go ahead.
Can you talk little bit about the scoping, especially when it comes to third-party libraries? Because from what we have seen in the recent past, that's where many vulnerabilities lie. And how wide do you scope? You should scope to catch those, and when it becomes too big, the scope.
Excellent question. That's a really good question. Oh, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Can you repeat the question one more time? Sorry.
I would like you to talk a bit about scoping and especially including third-party libraries and so on, because that's where I've seen a lot of vulnerabilities in the past. And how do you scope it wide enough, but not too wide, and the audit becomes too expensive and
yeah. Okay. Yes.
more.
So the scoping is time and labor intensive, which is why it's very valuable. In terms of how it's done, a lot of it has to do with information gathering, so getting to know the project, speaking with project maintainers, really understanding what their security needs are and where they need the most help, because unfortunately, typically budgets tend to be pretty limited, so it has to be very focused. And lots of times that does mean not having the opportunity to review all the dependencies, because as you said, that can very much expand the scope of a project. So by focusing on kind of the most high-risk code or the most high-risk parts of the project, which that is largely informed by the threat model, as well as learning about the project directly from maintainers, has been really helpful. I think in a perfect world, yes, any or the most high risk, for example, dependencies could or should be in scope, but it's always a question of determining the right amount of spreading, right, on the toast. So you don't want to have it be so thin that there's nothing there, and you don't want to have it so thick that like you said, it expands budgets. So it's all about doing the most you can with what you have, really. But in a perfect world, and as we and as more interest and funding goes into this space, potentially more third-party dependencies could be reviewed. So thank you. I think we had one more question, and then we can adjourn.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, all right. I'd like to dig deeper into the long-term effects of your audit. You stated on one slide that it is important to have the right experts in the team. On the other hand, later on during the Q&A, you stated that you are changing the project documentation. And my question is, well, when you experienced one project over time, were these the same people, or did you see a fluctuation in the people, but the process documentation aligns everyone coming newly into the team? How is your experience with this?
That's an excellent question. And just to clarify, doing things like updating documentation is not something that the auditors themselves would do. That typically would come in the form of recommendation. So for example, as part of doing the audit, finding weaknesses in documentation, for example. A really good one that I know has helped projects over time is, if they don't have it yet, essentially, what do you have for me if I came into this project as a new developer and I want to contribute? Where do I start? So having something like an onboarding guide or a good security policy that kind of covers those things is going to help a project over time, because they'll have that kind of as a playbook. And if they don't have something like that, then it'll be recommended to develop something like that. And we've been able to gather a decent amount of resources, both from internally from us as well as externally from other organizations, guides, things like that. So those have been very helpful. And then at least with my experience, so I can speak to my specific experience with curl. So we did we as an OSTIF, we've personally done 2 audits of curl now. The first one, I believe, was in 2021, maybe before I think 2021. And I believe the second one was, time. They were a couple years apart. And thankfully, the Curl project has had a very strong core team, including the lead maintainer, Daniel, who we've worked with multiple times now. And during our first audit, there was, I believe, one or two higher medium type things that were just kind of novel due to the nature of the research to find those vulnerabilities. And then the second audit was significantly cleaner in that the fixes and improvements from the previous audit very much seem to carry over into the follow-up audits. Both, and yes, and that involves improvements made to the actual practices too. So for example, there's a lot of great built-in tools in some of the, like GitHub, for example, and lots of times they're just not used. You just got to turn it on, turn on 2FA, for example. So also utilizing what's already out there just to prevent any kind of additional burden onto the project. Because you can have the most perfect tool in the world, but if it's extremely hard to implement, no one's going to implement it, right? So, so it's, again, I think finding that balance of what's the most we can do with the expertise that we have to improve the project holistically. So and this is why I think, yes, more kind of follow-on research on kind of After Effects is going to be, I think, good for us to do, because I think it'll be really good to put that in a very digestible way to be able to communicate that. So I'll certainly have to think about it more as well. So wow, with that, that is my time. Is that my time? Or
yeah, I think
okay.
we should end it here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Amir.
Thank you so much, everyone. Really, thank you.